Welcome into episode 118 of The Checklist, brought to you by Secure Mac. I'm Ken Ray.
And I'm August Trometer.
Australia ruins everything. Security hardware goes on safari, and which government wants to know where you've been sleeping? Find out on this edition of The Checklist, brought to you by Secure Mac. Keeping track of the fight between world governments and tech companies over encryption has felt to me like watching a car wreck in slow motion, or like watching a guy try to defuse a bomb, knowing that that guy is going to run out of time. From Ars Technica. On Thursday, the 6th of December, the Australian Parliament approved a measure that critics say will weaken encryption in favor of law enforcement and the demands of government. The new law, which has been pushed for since at least 2017, requires that companies provide a way to get at encrypted communications and data via a warrant process. It also imposes fines of up to $10 million Australian for companies that do not comply and $50,000 Australian for individuals who do not comply. In short, the law thwarts, or at least tries to thwart, strong encryption. Now, there's a part in there aimed at individuals, right? I mean, like, $10 million is nothing for Apple, partly because they can pay it, but also, they've got lawyers, and their lawyers have lawyers. I mean, they can fight and fight and fight for years. $50,000 for individuals, though, I mean, be that Australian or American, I mean, it seems to me that that's about scaring someone in custody, not only with being locked up, but also with a fine that would, take years, I'm sure, for almost anybody who might be subject to it.
Sure, and maybe that's why they're doing it, is to just intimidate people to unlock the phone or unlock the device instead of being saddled with debt for a very long time. Mm-hmm. You just sort of like the guy who pulls you over and puts his hand on his gun and says, do you mind if I look in your trunk? Well, what idiot is going to say no unless there's a body in there? Because he's got his hand on a gun. And it doesn't matter that he has no right to look in the trunk, but he has a hand on his gun.
Right.
So you open up the trunk and you prove that there's nothing in there.
Well, and here's the thing. I mean, you say he has no right, and you're right, he has no right. I mean, the thing that they're saying here is this is going to be a warrant process, but it's hard to, not worry that that's just going to be a rubber stamp. Here's where all this gets stranger, though. The proposed legislation asks for the impossible. According to the report, the statute says that companies cannot be compelled to introduce a systemic weakness or a systemic vulnerability into their software or hardware to satisfy government demands. Those terms are not fully defined in the current law, but are said to be added in the forthcoming amendments. I'm pretty sure we've talked about this just in the last few episodes, but let's do it again. Why is what they're asking for impossible?
Well, encryption is basically math. And I don't think what they're asking for is mathematically possible. Now, they could cobble together an encryption system that, has some sort of backdoor key. But I still think from a mathematic point of view, it becomes very hard to do that with the way encryption works. But let's say that it is possible. We still shouldn't do it. The thing that drives me crazy is you've got these legislators who do nothing but push paper all day, who think they have the knowledge to be able to order something like this done. And then to top it off, let's say it is possible. Who keeps the key? Is it the companies like Apple, or is it the government? If it's a company like Apple, once government comes to them and says, okay, we need the key, then it's out. I mean, this is not like a key that says do not copy on it. You can't get duplicated at your locksmith. It's software. It's, you send an email with it and now you've got 2 copies of it. So, once it's out, anyone can use it. And if it's the government that's going to keep hold of these keys, the NSA, they exposed 100 gigabytes of their own classified data last year because they bungled securing it. We can't trust these guys with something that gives those guys basically the keys to our devices.
That's the interesting thing, right? There are a couple things that you say there. First of all, when you say who's going to keep control of it, I remember sometime in the U.S. over the past year, some legislator said, well, no, the government's not going to have it. The companies that we want to, be able to access the information is going to have it. And I thought, well, that seems really convenient. So basically, you're demanding that they weaken their devices, but then putting the target on them. Now, Apple is not only worried about who it is that's going to come knocking on their door saying we need into this phone, but then they also need to guard against anyone else who wants that key. But really, the impossible part is they're saying, hey, this device is too strong. We need you to make it so that we can get in, but we're not going to make you make it any weaker. Except, of course, you are, because you're saying you need to be able to get in. And Apple and, other companies of their ilk are saying, no, you see, this is made so you can't. And so if you say that you can't compel me to make it weaker, then you can't compel me to let you in, except you are compelling me to let you in, but you're telling me that I don't have to make it weaker to do that. I guess what I need is my magic hat to make that possible.
Well, I think that's where the systemic weakness clause applies. But, if they amend this law, then, and they define that in such a way that you can't, Apple or some other company can't go, well, it can't be done unless we weaken our device, then we've got a problem. Right now you can just take it to court and say, well, we can't weaken our device and it's a systemic weakness. Mm-hmm. So we can't do that. And they get off the hook.
Now, a lot of people listening to this may be wondering, okay, this sounds bad for Australia. Why do I care? Well, because we have a deal with Australia. Adam Molnar, a lecturer in criminology at Deakin University in Australia, pointed out to Ars Technica that the new law not only implicates his home country, but also the other 4 members of the so-called Five Eyes of English-speaking nations, which includes New Zealand, Canada, the UK, and, hey everybody, the United States. Now, if you don't know who or what the Five Eyes are, Wikipedia reminds us they're an intelligence alliance comprising the 5 countries I mentioned a moment ago. These countries are parties in the multilateral UK-USA agreement, a treaty for joint cooperations in signals intelligence. Now, with its focus on data privacy and protecting its users, you might expect Apple to say something on this issue, and it has. Over the weekend, Apple Insider ran a piece saying that the group Reform Government Surveillance issued a statement decrying the legislation. The group, which includes Apple, Dropbox, Evernote, Facebook, Google, LinkedIn, Microsoft, Oath, Snap, and Twitter, said the new Australian law is deeply flawed, overly broad, and lacking an adequate independent oversight over the new authorities. Reform Government Surveillance went on to say that the legislation tries to undermine the cybersecurity, human rights, or the right to privacy of our users. It's the little things. So Apple's got a new security idea that is actually a really old security idea. Well, really old in internet terms. Apple Insider says the Cupertino company is testing USB security key support for its web browser, Safari. Actually, the report says Apple's latest Safari technology preview includes support for the Web Authentication API, which allows users to validate website login credentials via hardware security keys that typically come in the form of a USB stick. And I said this is a really old idea. I worked in a call center back in 2002. And on my lanyard was an RSA thing that flashed numbers at me, kind of like Google Authenticator. We're basically talking about the same thing, right?
Yes and no. The USB key would provide numbers, but I think it's a lot simpler than Google Authenticator. I'm not totally up to date on the web authentication spec, but I believe the USB device would essentially have encryption keys on it that would stay constant. Think about it as like just a big long password, and then you would go in and you'd set up sites like Dropbox, Twitter, whatever, to use that key to log in. Then you would just stick your key in the side of the laptop or whatever computer, and Safari would recognize that and then log you into that site. it can be used in other ways, depending on the implementation, the data or the app actually being used. For example, on a desktop computer could be encrypted and couldn't be opened without the key. In this case, it's just Safari adopting that standard. Google Authenticator, on the other hand, keeps generating codes, and that actually is probably more secure, with the exception of the fact that, number one, it's Google, so there's that to worry about. And two, it's much easier to use when you have access to a camera, because generally Google Authenticator works with QR codes, and you can use regular codes. It'll put up text, but the QR code is much easier just to snap, which is a little hard to do when you're trying to log into a website.
Hang on. We might be thinking about two different things, because I thought Google Authenticator was just the one that, Authenticator is the one, at least when I have it, it just punches up 6 different numbers.
Right.
It's tied to whatever my login is for Google stuff. It puts up 6 numbers. Those change about every minute to every 2 minutes, I guess. Or are you thinking that that's just how it starts off? Because I know that the only one that I've ever used is like the 6-digit thing, but maybe you're saying I had to use the QR code to set that up initially? Because it's been too long since I did that. I don't remember anymore.
Yeah.
Okay.
No, that's exactly what I'm talking about. But bottom line is, I think we can agree that using only passwords isn't going to do the trick anymore. Having something like this ups the security, especially when you pair it with 2-factor authentication or biometrics, which is nice.
Now, one imagines that this test is part of Apple's continued push into the enterprise. The piece points out that, such devices as the USB stick that they talk about in the article grant a higher level of protection than simple text-based passwords, just like you just said. Instead of relying solely on text-based passwords, which can be stolen or forgotten, the system introduces a physical hardware component into the mix. I guess it's that that thing where you plug a specific thing in. I mean, I like the Google Authenticator thing because I've had it now on 2 different phones. If I lost my phone, I can go in, I can reset Google Authenticator to the next phone that I get, and it's okay. I guess what I'm wondering is something that connects physically, the USB stick, is that inherently better or stronger than the RSA unit or Google Authenticator or something like that?
In my opinion, I think it's a little less secure because the key itself isn't changing over time like Google Authenticator does. But it is easier to use. And makers have added additional checks to the devices like buttons or fingerprinting to make sure that a real person has physical access to the key instead of being at some sort of brute force attack over the web.
Now, while Apple could hardly be said to have done poorly on security in the past, one piece that I saw chided Apple for testing on Safari, a security feature that's been built into other browsers for a bit of time. Quoting that piece from Engadget, Safari is late to the game as Firefox launched support for WebAuth earlier this year, followed shortly by Google with Chrome. Individual sites and apps also support the standard, including Twitter, Facebook, and Office 365. It is a fair point, though, for my money, or really for the money of every company that's letting people choose Apple over other technologies, better late than never. I've got a good feeling about a really bad thing. I'll tell you what and why in a moment, but first a word about MacScan 3 from Secure Mac. Next time you go into a coffee shop, look around. There are so many more Macs in use today than there ever have been before. The CEO of Jamf says he thinks that number is going to get even bigger over the next couple of years. I notice the growing number of Macs. You notice the growing number of Macs. And you have to believe that bad guys are noticing that too. They want your data. Protect it with MacScan 3. MacScan 3 is a great defense against malicious software attacks aimed at your Mac. It's developed by Secure Mac, trusted names in computer security and developers of exceptional security software for the Mac for well over a decade. MacScan 3 detects and removes Mac malware, catches keyloggers, removes tracking cookies, and provides full range or targeted scanning, all without crowding up your hard drive or slowing down your computer. So enjoy that soy mint Christmas latte and a shot of security that comes with MacScan 3. Sign up for a free 30-day trial today at securemac.com/MacScan. That's MacScan 3 by Secure Mac. Your 30-day free trial is waiting at securemac.com/MacScan. Well, in the day following up on a past checklist item, good news on the Marriott hack. I mean, it's bad news. Really bad news, actually, on a global level, but it strikes me as good news for the average John and Jane Q public, assuming John and Jane stay at Marriott properties. CNET says a Chinese intelligence gathering effort was behind the massive Marriott Hotel's data breach that exposed the personal information for up to 500 million people, the New York Times reported on Tuesday. If you don't remember, it was just a few flea bag joints like Westin, Sheraton, the Luxury Collection, 4 Points by Sheraton, W Hotels, St. Regis, Le Méridien, Aloft, Element, Tribute Portfolio, and Design Hotels. CNET says the hackers are believed to have been working for China's Ministry of State Security, the Times reported, citing sources who had been briefed on the investigation's preliminary results. The revelation emerges as the U.S. Justice Department is preparing to announce new indictments against Chinese hackers working for the intelligence and military services, the Times also reported. I gotta say, August, I feel bad about how good this story makes me feel. And maybe I'm wrong to feel any amount of relief on this, but my assumption is that since this was an intelligence operation, people who stayed at the hotels listed aren't likely to have their information turn up on the dark web. Does that sound like my relief makes sense?
From that point of view, sure. But these aren't just hackers. They're government-sponsored, presumably well-funded, and they're an intelligence operation. Who knows what they might do with the data? I do think casual travelers have much less to worry about than frequent travelers. But the frequent travelers that go to places like China or countries that China are interested in, that's a problem for them. Mm-hmm. China could do a lot of stuff with that data just by analyzing it. And I'll give you an example, and sorry for being a little long-winded here, but prior to the Revolutionary War, Paul Revere belonged to 7 clubs in the Boston area that were well-known kind of revolutionary type idea clubs. Mm-hmm. And if you take a look at the other members of those clubs, along with Paul Revere, it would have been very easy for the British to pinpoint that he was sort of the between all these disparate groups of people. And they could have picked him off, and we might be living under UK rule right now. China can do the same thing. If they see groups of people staying at one hotel and then seeing the same groups of people staying at a different hotel, they can start to draw some connections there just based on where they're staying, where they're going, what cities they're in, and potentially using that to their advantage.
See, this whole thing is so opaque. I mean, I know I have no reason to doubt this story, but okay, so you say it was a Chinese intelligence operation, trying to figure out why. I mean, that's interesting. What you just said, the whole idea that it might just be data analysis. I mean, not just data analysis, because they're obviously learning more stuff, but I mean, that was an angle that I hadn't considered. I mean, I've been thinking about things like maybe there are specific people, they want to know specifically what they did and where they went, and then they found out they had access to so much more information. It also occurred to me just, for fun, that they might be flexing their facts, that they might be, see, the problem is then I start writing like a novel in my head. I mean, so how do we know that this happened? We know that this happened. I mean, I don't know how we know that this happened. It doesn't seem to me to be beyond the pale for China to send a not so subtle message. Hey, by the way, look what we can do. Are you sure you want to mess with us on this point or this point or this point? At this point in time. I mean, look, as I said before, from a global perspective, this story stinks. I know that. CNN points out the investigation's findings come amid an already precarious relationship between the U.S. and China over trade talks. Earlier this month, a top executive at Chinese telecommunications giant Huawei was arrested in Canada at the behest of U.S. authorities who accused her of deceiving financial institutions, putting them in a position to violate sanctions against Iran. I wonder whether the operators in this instance, like I say, were just flexing their muscles, demonstrating the kind of info that they could find, the kind of damage they could do, which I will grant you is still a terrifying prospect. I don't know why that makes me feel better, except I was talking to one of the Nikolai, one of the guys from Secure Mac earlier, and they were like, yeah, me too. And I was like, all right, I don't know if that makes me feel better about me or worse about you, man. No word, by the way, on whether China was also behind the Dunkin' Donuts hack that we also mentioned last week. Although I gotta say, that's a world I want to live in, where China's like, yeah, we can has all your hotels and your donut perks.
Yeah, and all of your personal information.
Yeah, the little things. Hey, if you're looking for more security news and how-tos, the place to look is securemac.com/checklist. There you'll find notes for this show, for the last show, for all the shows we've done to this point. With the holidays just like right on top of us now, or with us right on top of the holidays, some of our earliest shows were actually about safe holiday shopping, both, out in meat space and also online. Seriously, there is a ton of great information that we've been building for the past couple of years. The place to find it is securemac.com/checklist. If you have a question you'd like to ask or a topic you would like to hear us hit, our email address is checklist@securemac.com. The address again is checklist@securemac.com. And if you can't remember that, please do remember this. You're listening to The Checklist, brought to you by Secure Mac. And we'll talk to you next week.